Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 16th Salon of the Maternal Gift Economy Breaking Through series hosted by Genevieve Vaughan and the International Feminists for the Gift Economy. I'm Letecia, Layson, your moderator. We're honored to have Sherri Mitchell and Miigam'agan today. Both guests will speak, and then we'll be open up for questions and answers. Our first speaker is Miigam'agan. She is in Canada. She's a Wabanaki grandmother from the Fish Clan of the Burnt Church. She's a mother of 3 adult children and grandmother of 4 grandchildren. Her life has been devoted to the Wabanaki cultural revival and promoting an understanding of Indigenous matriarchal systems. Miigam'agan teaches grandmother teachings on the stages of life on human developmental cycles, cultural history, and ceremonial roles and practices in women and men, drawing Wabanaki languages as references. Currently, Miigam'agan is elder in residence at St. Thomas University in Fredericton, New Brunswick. In this role, she provides the support for First Nations students and offers opportunities for them to learn from elders who are carriers of traditional knowledge. She is also an important link between the university and the First Nations communities. Miigam'agan sits on the executive committee of the Urban Aboriginal Knowledge Network of the University of New Brunswick, which sets research priorities and ensures that the research they support meets the needs of the urban Aboriginal peoples. She is also a member of the steering committee on adult education initiatives for the Catherine Donnelly Foundation. Another thing that just happened during the winter is that Miigam'agan was appointed chief in her area, and she is the first woman chief in her territory. So welcome, Miigam'agan.
Walalio dandeli igen mo yo kiskuk juguan uskudemen dandeli en nuegadio Wabanaki nige ya dandel banasik Genocidal hamu dandel banato banalisit dan dewida chichahami jina dan deluswalu de benik. So in my mother tongue, I've extended gratitude, thanking you for inviting me. I'm shared in our language who I am and gratitude to the life that's been gifted to all of us. And we are at a place that's the truth that has been spoken for many, many generations. And it's the time when the human spirit of our people and today humanity is very low and questioning uncertainties, and for our sacred Earth Mother to open those spaces and release in Miigam'agan the children that was taken. So I don't have any words to express that, but to pay attention why and how they're surfacing now. And I think that is really important to open ourselves to be still and to receive what is being delivered and what's being gifted to us as the merging of the young babies and children that have been released. So those are, it's a little bit difficult to translate that in English. Our languages are very, it's already built in our languages that understands that relationship with the unseen world and our connection to our sacred mother and our cosmic family. And the original teachers of our people are still held in our language that is expressed through our culture. It's no coincidence that our languages were outlawed, therefore severing that connection of our spiritual practices and our connections to our sacred mother and of the natural world, both on our sacred mother and in the cosmic realm. It's when I was invited to come and share what's happening for us in this time. Many of us, there's been sacred circles, sacred fires being lit across the nations, across the land, and people have been gathering. It's a long-awaited truth that we've been very aware of. Those deep-held knowledge of the survivors, the former students from Indian residential schools who've already disclosed in safe settings in our own communities. So now for this to open, it's both a celebration and a deep mourning. And we know when we lose loved ones, or when we finally hear the word of their departure, and our families are deeply affected. And how do we begin to come together? And as humanity, it's also in our prayers as we move forward. It's really also important to think about the weight that is also lifted by the ones who perpetrated these acts, and release. So there's a release of burden and a release of healing for everyone to begin to move. How do we move forward in a good way? And I think I will just stop there for a moment, just to just to regroup my thoughts, and my emotions are coming forward, and I need to pay attention to that. And I encourage you to also pay attention and to be present and to listen with that care and that understanding that we're all in this together. So I'll stop here at this time, and Sherri and I are both sharing this session, so I'll move it forward back to Sherri.
Thank you, Miigam'agan. Yes, everyone, please remember to just breathe as we're listening to these very challenging and deep truths. Both Sherri and Miigam'agan have medicine to help transform this energy and to help ground us during this session. So Sherri Mitchell, a friend of ours and a member of the International Feminists for the Gift Economy. She was born and raised in the Penobscot Indian Reservation. She received her Juris Doctorate and a certificate in Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy from the University of Arizona's James E. Rogers College of Law. Sherri is an alumni of American Indian Ambassador Program and the Udall Native American Congressional Internship Program. Sherri also received the Mahoney Dunn International Human Rights and Humanitarian Award for research into human rights violations against Indigenous peoples. She is a longtime advisor to the American Indian Institute's Healing the Future program and currently serves as an advisor to the Indigenous Elders and Medicine Peoples Council of North and South America. She is the founding director of the Land Peace Foundation, an organization dedicated to the global protection of Indigenous rights and the preservation of Indigenous ways of life. Prior to forming the Land Peace Foundation, Sherri served as a law clerk to the Solicitor of the United States Department of Interior as an associate with Fredericks, Peebles, and Morgan Law Firm, a civil rights educator from Maine's Attorney General's Office, and as the staff attorney for the Native American unit of Pine Tree Legal. Sherri is the author of the award-winning book, Sacred Instructions, Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change. Welcome again, Sherri. We're so glad to have you with us.
Wiliwan Letecia and Chi Wiliwan Nidapesk Miigam'agan Katsalmo. This is such a difficult conversation for us to have. And so I think Miigam'agan and I are probably going to just keep going back and forth throughout this first hour because it's, it's heavy. Miigam'agan has had experiences within this system where she and her siblings were taken from their family. Unfortunately, ended up being returned, but there was harm done in the time that they were away. She was part of the 60s scoop era, and where what followed the residential schools and the day schools in both Canada and the United States has been this system which is ongoing of social services taking Indian children. So they weren't taking them and putting them into residential schools, but now the ongoing trauma is the removal of Indigenous children and the placement of them within the foster care system. There have been huge cases within the United States courts related to this issue. One case out of South Dakota where there were 600 children removed in a 2-year time period. And the director of the Department of Health and Human Services in the state of South Dakota, the judge, the state's attorney, and all of those who were involved in this process were all found guilty as individuals outside of the organizations that they worked in, being found complicit in these crimes of removal of these children. And they were not being given due process rights. They were not being provided with the opportunity for any jeopardy hearing, sometimes for up to a year after the children are taken. They're supposed to occur within 48 hours. They were rubber stamping the waiver of those parents' rights without the consent of the parents. This seems like this was a long time ago, but this is a contemporary case that's still pending in appeals. And even after they were found to be complicit in these crimes of removal of these children, the state of South Dakota continued to do this so that the judge had to enact sanctions twice since that case has been heard in the last couple of years against those who are responsible for the removal of these children. And there have been systematic cases. The Goldwater Institute here in the United States has been funding cases like this. and other cases related to the Indian Child Welfare Act, which was established here in the United States specifically to address the genocidal removal of Indigenous children and to prevent that. And now the Goldwater Institute is investing millions of dollars in cases like this one out of South Dakota, and other cases, the baby Veronica case, and others, where they're trying to dismantle the Indian Child Welfare Act and claiming that it's racist, to remove the rights that Indigenous nations have to the protection of their children from being taken by these state governments. And so, this hits very close to home for many people because there are many people who have been impacted by that. And one of the things that I do here in my own territory is I work with my tribe social services department to protect our children in some ways, and that work that I do in that regard is simply for me to give something back to my community. To it's not a career path. It's work that I do just because I want to remain connected to the future of my community, and to be able to give something back to the community that helped to raise me up. When this whole thing first started, I had this dream. And when I woke up, it just really, really disturbed me. I couldn't figure out, what is this about? And I've told Miigam'agan about this dream. And in this dream, I was with Miigam'agan, and we were walking, and we were walking along this pathway, and as we were walking, up behind us, there were all of these different Wabanaki communities and other Native communities. And we were in Miigam'agan's territory, and she was saying, oh, this is this community, and we can tell it because of this landmark here. And she was pointing all the different communities out to me. And in every single tree, as we were walking in every community, it's like we were walking by communities, like they were just landmarks on our path. And there were these trees, big trees in every one of these communities. And there were, several of them, and every single tree, from every single branch, there was a child hanging. And when I woke up, I was just sick from this dream. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And then all of a sudden, this whole thing erupted. And I said, oh my God, these are these children. This is my spirit giving me a visual representation of the horror of what's unfolding here. Mm-hmm. And when we were walking in this dream, I just had my hand on my heart, and I just kept saying, oh my God, there are so many of them. And this is what's being uncovered. And the thing that I think is really important for people to understand is that these are not children who were recognized, who are listed as having died in these communities. These are throwaway children, because what happened was they were taking in more children than they could house. They were taking our children in such volume that they didn't have a place to put them, and they were killing the overflow. And there are all of these stories of people who have survived these residential schools, where the children coming out of these schools were telling people that the priests and the nuns from these schools were giving them bags to throw into the incinerator, and telling them, not to look in them. But one person stuck their hand in there, and they felt fingers and toes. They were making the children throw the bodies of other children that they had killed into these incinerators. And this is not the distant past, right? This is not like all of these generations ago, even though it went on for generations. There are people today who are in these schools who can tell these stories, who are still living. And the impact of that on our communities, the impact of the ongoing trauma of all of those who have been taken. I often tell a story. My grandmother went to a day school. She didn't go to residential school. And she didn't know how to speak English when she went to that school. And every child that came into that school was punished if they didn't speak English, if they spoke in their own language. Well, she didn't know how to speak English. She only knew how to speak her own language. So from wherever you're from, imagine being a small child. She was 8 years old at the time when they forced her to go to that school, and they told her grandmother, if you don't send her to this school, we're going to take her and we're going to send her away, and you'll never see her again. And so imagine being an 8-year-old child and being put somewhere where you didn't speak the language that was being spoken. And every single time you opened your mouth to try to communicate, you were beaten. That was the reality of my grandmother. And that was the reality of all of these children, this horrific, torturous treatment. And to think about the horror of what we're finding, these unmarked graves where these children were just thrown in there like they were garbage, like they didn't have anyone that loved them. And the parents and the grandparents and all those who had been left behind, who were looking for them, who were missing them, whose hearts were broken because they had been taken. And they had been taken so that they could be thrown away like garbage. And why is it that these churches that have committed these atrocities and these governments are not being tried just like those who were tried in the Nuremberg trials? Because these are horrific crimes against humanity. And if these priests, if these Nazis can be tried and charged at the age of 80 and 90, then so can these priests and so can these nuns. And there needs to be a stop to the immunity that these people are experiencing. And they need to be charged for these crimes against humanity. And they need to make reparations. They need to make reparations for all of those who have been lost. And so, the heaviness, like there, you see all of these things online where people have said that, these children in their final rest have woken a nation. And these are things that we've all known, the stories we've grown up with. And so there's a confirmation of what we know. And like Miigam'agan said, there's some sense of celebration that these children are finally being found so that they can be returned. But we don't even know who they are. They're not even given the dignity of their names in death. And so, there's so much grief over that. At the same time, the heaviness of that grief is immense. And we had a vigil here in our territory. There have been marches and vigils all over Miigam'agan's territory and all the way from the east to the west, across Canada, and also in the United States, where Representative Haaland has promised to begin searching for children at the residential schools that were located here in the U.S. And to date, I think there's 1,505 bodies of children who were murdered that have been located, and this is a handful of locations. There's still over 130 residential schools that have not been searched yet. And if we have 1,500 plus children in a handful of locations, we can just imagine what those numbers are going to be once all 130 plus schools have been searched. Mm-hmm. And it's so important. It's so important for people to not allow this to become the next isn't that terrible thing that we move on from.
Mm.
That people need to really do something and insist upon something happening in relation to these horrific crimes that have taken place against our peoples and against our communities or against our future generations, and to every single one of these individual innocent children who was dragged away from their family, subjected to horrific abuse, and then murdered senselessly and thrown away like they were garbage. Every single one of those individual children deserves justice. And so we're here to tell this story because we want justice for those children. And so I'm going to give it back to Miigam'agan to see if you have anything else at this point that you would like to add.
Thanks. Thank you, Sherri. In the Atlantic, and I'm more familiar with the Atlantic in the East Coast, Wabanaki, the last residential school that closed its doors was in 1969. And so my generation grew up, like our relatives are the four-legged relatives living in the bush. When human beings come into the forest, they all take off. Well, that's my life. That's my generation. We were hyper vigilant, and so when vehicles came into our community, the children would just gather into the bush until someone comes for us. So, but we were protected from the Indian residential school, but we got caught in the second wave of, Sherri mentioned, the 60s school. And so fortunately for myself and my sisters, we were found, because at that time when children are removed from their families through a child Indian agent, most of the children we never return until they're of age, if that. So we we returned home within 2 years when my mother found us back and stole us back. And there was a lot of stuff in the whole process of that act. But the Indian day schools are very similar. We did see our families and we stayed in our communities. And those are, this whole experience is what it is. It's genocide. It's what we witnessed was an act of genocide, and the recipe to warfare is the same. And it's been said that we had a women's summit a couple of years ago before the lockdowns, and one of our she's very well known, Buffy St. Marie, came to our area, and she opened up with a statement by saying that that we should not take what colonization has done on our homelands, that we should not take it personal. And I was, if I didn't know who she was, I would have probably been outraged and intercepted. But I knew she was going somewhere with this, and she reminded us that by the time that the colonizers arrived on our shorelines, they had already mastered this displacement of earth-based cultures of Indigenous people across the lands. So they've already mastered that. And so what's happened here on our homelands has happened on the other side of the globe. And so we have a story that is what Sherri and I are sharing today is nothing new in your to any of you that are aware of your history. It's we're seeing it being replayed, and we've witnessed it again with children being put in cages, and so this is for all of us, and the awakening and the return of the young children and how they were discarded. I have to say, there's, as a mother and a grandmother, I find myself in different spaces, and it's almost like that. I'm not sure how I feel. I know that the act of how they were killed and how they has to be addressed. But were they also, and I wonder, like, they were spared of so much, because this whole experience of children being taken in these institutions, and families are not allowed in those buildings when those children are in there. We have no access or knowledge of what is happening to our loved ones in those buildings. And I have to, when they become of age and they're able to leave and they bring home those stories, it's the Holocaust all over again, how they were experimented, they were abused, and how much pain could they survive, trauma, how could, and instilling that depth of trauma in our children, to witness babies and small children being disposed. So, and the Indian day schools is to see how much we can endure when our teeth are being extracted with very little Novocaine. This is stories, and when I reflect back the stories that came back from the survivors, and just my own personal stories, and my siblings and community now who are now writing their testimonies of their experiences in the Indian day school, what they've endured. It's just a lot, where it's really opening so much. And so ceremonies, our languages, and being together, it might not were confined in these encampments called reserves or reservations. It wasn't too long ago we weren't able to leave these areas without permission from the colonial system, which was the church, the law enforcement, and the government. So it's truly a long-awaited truth for our voices to be amplified out there, and I believe, from a matriarchal culture, our voices, womankind, our voices are being heard, and womankind is being validated, because when we talk of woman, we're talking about our children, our families, our nations. So it's a deep healing for humanity. And so there's a part of me that feels a sense of liberation, and I'm so in gratitude, and where ceremonies are being celebrated, because when we speak in our language, we are uniting with each other, And we're healing the colonial experience, both physically and spiritually. This is what is happening. It's hard to look at this through a wounded lens, and but when we're looking at it through an Indigenous lens, there's also a great celebration, because only celebration is about knowing that there's justice that's going to come forth. Miigam'agan.
Yes. Andali we see wana hamu Kwasset and Ajiobana Wabskewi. Zilda and Donabama Kawasis, Nobana Wabskewi, Nakakakus, Notibike. So just doing what I didn't do at the beginning, because it's, we're set off by this to remember, as my sister just said, that we continue on. That my name in my language, Weh'na Kwasset, I am from the Penobscot Nation, and my family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation, and my grandmother line is Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe of Zibayak. And just to remember that this search for justice is one that we are not walking alone. That these children are not just speaking out for Indigenous peoples of North America, Turtle Island. These children are speaking out by all who have been victimized by these institutions that are hiding behind the name of God. And to me, this is the most prolific and the most horrific forms of heresy and blasphemy that have ever existed, is the use of the name of God. Talk about using God's name in vain. To stand behind the name of God to commit these horrific crimes against humanity, going all the way back to the early doctrines of discovery, where these papal bulls said that people had the right to vanquish and to enslave and to impoverish all those that they met who would not fall under the rule of the Church of Rome. And when we think about the devastation that has gone on across the globe for 600 years from the time of those papal bulls, where a large portion of the African continent was terrorized, and peoples from across that continent were put into slavery, into perpetual slavery as ordered by these papal bulls, and brought to our territory here, where they were forced to live on and work as enslaved peoples. They are not slaves, they were enslaved peoples who were forced to work on this land and stand on the bodies of our people, of Indigenous peoples here. And were forced to earn their freedom by becoming buffalo soldiers and killing Indians. And so when we think about that horrific history, and we think about the use of the name of God to perpetuate these crimes, that has to stop being allowed, because there has been this immunity that has been given. Where the Church of Rome declared itself its own nation, has its own, militia to surround and protect it, where they've been given this insulation of immunity from harm and from prosecution for the crimes that they've committed against humanity. And that needs to stop. And the only way that stops is if we all come together and demand that it stop. It can't just be us. It can't just be individual voices and individual peoples asking for that. It needs to be all of us coming together to address this horrific misuse of religion and misuse of of the name of, Kachiniwasк and Extramundo, the misuse of the name of the creator, Niskum from Miigam'agan's territory, that misuse of the name and image of God that has been so greatly distorted by these institutions of evil who have utilized and wielded this power in ways that have spread unimaginable harm to peoples across the world. And these children are helping to expose that harm and to put it into perspective and to say enough is enough is enough is enough. Because what we also learned in our community, we have generations. I know of in my own family line, 3 generations of young people who were subjected to severe sexual abuse at the hands of the priests who were sent into our communities. And when I was a small girl, one of the priests who became very good friends with some of the people in the community called one of our elders to their bedside as they were dying and said, "I want you to know that it is the practice of the Catholic Church to punish pedophile priests by sending them to the reservations." And so when there would be a pedophile priest that was exposed to them in one of the white communities, the punishment for that pedophile priest would be to be sent to the native communities. And so we were given all of the pedophile priests. And so we have entire generations of people in our community, entire generations of men who were forced to serve as altar boys, who were raped by these priests that were sent into our communities. There are babies in the walls of the rectories that were hidden in the walls of the rectories from the priests getting the nuns pregnant. And so, these crimes that we have been subjected to in the name of religion, falsely under the name of God, because we know that this religion is completely devoid of God. Because there is no God that would commit these types of crimes. And anyone that really truly has a creator in their heart knows that to be true. And that shield that has been put up and allowed this to proliferate, as Miigam'agan said, this isn't just our story. Before the colonizers came here, they had burned and drowned their own women. They had killed all of their healers. Anyone that was connected to the source of life, connected to the earth, because when we're connected to the earth, we're self-sustaining. And when we're self-sustaining, we don't need to be adhering to their false power. But when they can separate us from the earth, when they can separate us from our own ways of knowing and being in relationship to Niglaskiknamik, to Mother Earth, and to that sacred way of being in harmony, that way of life that we call Skajinawabamousawag, and when they can separate us from that, when they can get us to deny our own sense of autonomy and our own sense of well-being, our own sense of sovereignty, then they can control us. And this is the greatest lie that's ever been fed to humanity. And it's time that this lie stop being told. And so I hope that we can all come together to address this incredible lie, and that we can stand together, under the voices of truth that these children are telling us with the finding of their bodies. And we can move forward together to do something about this once and for all, to stop this reign of terror that has lasted for millennia. And move forward together in a good way that honors the sacredness of every life. And I think that that's no matter what has been done to us. One of the things One of the first things I learned how to say in my language was that I was proud to be a Native woman. And I am so honored to be from the matriarchs that I come from, because despite everything that has happened to us, we still come from a place of heart, because that is the center of the maternal gift economy, is having and carrying and protecting the heart of the mother through our lines. And when we think about the church, when we think about the Roman Catholic Church and other churches, but primarily the Roman Catholic Church, and how their denial of any type of presence of the sacred feminine, their denial of women within their ranks, was a complete denial of the heart of the mother in everything that they did. And that complete denial of the heart of the mother in everything they did is evident by the horrific actions that they have taken. And so what we really need to do is to move forward and really hold that fire in the heart of the mother in the center of all that we're doing, so we can burn up all of these things that are desecrating the sacredness of life. And my hope is that we will be able to come together as an international community and demand that something be done, something similar to the Nuremberg trials, that there has to be accountability, that there has to be something that is done to send a strong message, but also to stop the harms that are continuing, because the Goldwater Institute is a religious organization at its heart. It started out with some of these Southern Baptists, and now the Koch brothers are one of the leading funders behind it. And so when we think about the ways that people are still being manipulated through religion to support these organizations that are committing these horrific acts, they're still sending missionaries into the jungles to try to convert Indians. That has never stopped. They're still working to dispossess Indigenous mothers of their children. And that needs to stop. And so hopefully we can move in that direction. And so I think that's all I want to say for now.
I think I just want to bring something that's taking place now. And I think it's a great distraction to shift the energy of our focus of what's come forth, and the burnings of the churches. I've been in enough demonstrations. I've been to know how what happens, and most recent one was when we were protecting our lands, and how the system would, in this case, it was people that was brought in to burn the police cars that was not even coming from our own community, but let the public believe that it was our people that was burning the RCMP police cars. So now the churches are being burnt in some areas that I'm hearing in the reports. And the residential school, Indian residential school here in the Atlantic was burnt a number of years back. And what they did immediately is what people are talking about, because they've witnessed bulldozers coming in and putting the debris and the area, lifting the earth and putting it in trucks and hauling out all the debris and the land, the gravel or whatever, and no one knows where they brought that. But those are some of the people now re-questioning about, and that's what they had said, that they were discarding the evidence. And so now, if you open up the news in Canada, there's churches being on fire, and it leaves people, the Canadian citizens, to believe that, this is how untrustworthy the Indigenous people are, burning. It's not just recent headline just before I got on here is that it's not sad to see those churches being set on fire, but it's sacrilegious. And so it's a continual war against Indigenous people, and we're the people are played against each other, and we're just being truly misrepresented. I think I really appreciate the invitation to be here and to be able, and for it to be recorded, because that's a gift of truth to being gifted to our future generations together. That there's always spaces of peacemaking and bringing our communities together, and this is the evidence that will be heard in the way into the future. So light continues. I'll close here, and I think that's it for me for today. Lalia.
I just want to add a little bit to that, because I think that point is so critically important. When that other issue was going on that Miigam'agan was talking about, what we ended up discovering was that they were putting these pictures of these police cars on fire all over the media to try to make it look like it was Indigenous people burning RCMP cars. And the truth is that there were no seats in these cars. They had been completely gutted out. They were shells. And they were just props. They put them there. They set them on fire on purpose. These were decommissioned old police cars to create this image that made it look like the Indigenous people were the ones who were committing these acts of violence, when the Indigenous people were peacefully gathered and prayerfully gathered to address the harms that were being done to their communities. And it's the same as our relatives right now out in Anishinaabe territory, who are, standing in protection of their sacred way of life. All of the wild ricing lakes in Minnesota are in the pathway of this Line 3 Enbridge pipeline. And, what's happening with that is the same thing that's happening with the cases that I was talking about earlier, is that there is absolutely no reason why these pipelines have to go through Native territory. They're purposely going through Native territory to diminish the rights of Indigenous peoples, because Indigenous rights are the last things that are protecting the earth from the harm that's being done by these corporations. And so there's this purposeful effort to dismantle Indigenous rights. That's why these pipelines are being put through our territories. And the people who are standing in protection of their sacred way of life, in protection of the waters that all life on the planet survives on, that these people are being made to look like they're villains, like they're, just interfering with what's going on for these corporations. But the truth is that this is a purposeful diminishment and dehumanization of Indigenous peoples, and it's a purposeful diminishment of the rights of Indigenous peoples. And so, as Miigam'agan says, there's, I don't have a lot of sadness in my heart for the destruction of these churches. However, we recognize that it's likely the destruction of evidence that's being done by those who are responsible for the harm, and then again shifting the blame onto Indigenous people. They light these churches on fire, then they come in and they're taking out all this earth around them where the bodies are being found. People need to use their common sense and to recognize that this is an attempt to hide evidence. This is not something that's being done by Indigenous peoples, that Indigenous peoples are just, essentially being framed for these things so that they can try. Every church that gets burned down, you can believe that there's evidence that's being destroyed with the burning of that, and that it is not the Indigenous peoples who are destroying that evidence, because we want every bit of it to be found. And so, we just ask people to really pay attention to these kinds of things, to use their common sense, and to stand with us in protection of the sacredness of life on all fronts, because Indigenous lands, Indigenous territories are the last pure places on the planet. And every single time they come in and destroy one of our communities, they're taking away another piece of everyone's ability to be able to survive on this planet. And so there's so much at stake when we talk about these things. So I think we're probably ready to move to Q&A. And I don't know about Miigam'agan, but I mean, just the emotion of all of this is exhausting. It's a lot to carry and to hold the space for this. So I think we're ready to hear from some other people.
Thank you, Miigam'agan and Sherri, for holding this space and for speaking the truth. I could find myself in the listening, going through waves of emotion for myself, because July 4th is celebrated as the liberation of the Philippines from the colonial United States. And, we share a common history of colonialism, the same kind of events that took place, not nearly as severe. We were fortunate, but the way in which strategically the United States liberated the Philippines. We also had Buffalo soldiers in the late 1800s, the African Americans who came over and actually, instead of fighting against the Filipinos, they actually fought against the USA and stayed in the Philippines, hoping that we would be liberated at that time in the late 1800s, when the United States took the Philippines after the Spanish. So there are lots of, when Sherri and Miigam'agan are talking about this global effect, wherever colonialism has happened, and even throughout old Europe, it's been a tradition of the warring tribes of people to take the children and rape the mothers. And this is a practice that's happened and was brought from old Europe around to us from those warring tribes for everywhere in the world. So I just want to honor the fact that the truth is being held in the light right now. It's very painful. I want to thank everyone for being present. And if there are perhaps any questions that you want to put forward, please do put them in the Q&A or in the comments. And I want to just bring to light Sherri's book, Sacred Instructions, because that is a 21-year ceremony that Sherri is attending to help bring unity to all of us. And I think it's an important work that we can bring together. So are there any questions, or Jen, if you have any words that you might want to share right now?
Thank you so much for telling the truth and making it so we can all understand it. People can understand it all over the world. And this has been such a tragic number of centuries. And now we're almost destroying the earth herself. So we really have to band together as people of goodwill, of people as mothers, people who care about each other and children, and do whatever we can. What can I say? I can only say that I'm really very sorry. It's nothing, but it is. Oh, we are all one people, and you have suffered so much. That's at our hands. So I wondered if we are going to have a prayer or a moment of silence or something that we can do before the Q&A.
I think that would be fine. I think it might be very important maybe to transition with just a moment of silence, and then maybe if one of you, either Sherri or Miigam'agan, might want to say words of prayer so that we can actually find our words to speak after such a potent, hour. So let's just have about a minute of silence starting now. Sherri, would you like to offer?
I would just like to ask if someone else could lead the prayer, so that someone else is praying for us. But
Okay.
we're not always leading the way. So I would like to ask for that.
Okay. So I'm happy to do that. Great Spirit, she who is all things, hold our hearts in our tender time right now. Gently ground us so that our spirits can feel housed again, embodied, fully. Gently open our throats so that we can speak directly from our hearts. Let our voice share what will be good for us to know together. Let us hold the space for all these young children whose bodies are being discovered, and their families and their communities. And let us hold the perpetrators, that their hearts that have been frozen in silence melt in the light of the heart of the mother. Let us be present here with one another and share what is needed and necessary so that we each can move forward in a good way, both in the grief and in the celebration of the liberation of this truth. Great Mother and Great Spirit, hold us that we know we're under one sky. We're children of one mother, the Great Mother, Mother Earth. May our tears cleanse and purify the truth of our deepest knowing. Blessed be. So Judith, I wonder if you have any questions, either personally for either women or generally. I do see one question in the comment field. That's a big question, but you might have some others.
Mary Claire asks, what are some of the initial steps that we can gauge socially and internationally to address these horrifying truths and begin the decolonization of our peoples, our languages? Are there tools you can suggest to actively engage in this process locally and internationally? And there's a very similar question from Maha Noureddin that asks, what is the best way of moving forward regarding exacting justice to all of these horrors? So basically, what are the next steps? What can we do to move forward?
Miigam'agan, did you have anything that you wanted to say before I share? No.
I'm going to defer this to you, Sherri.
Yeah, there's so many layers to that question and layers of responsibility, from the personal to your family, your community, your government, your city government, the world government, and then just what it means to be a human being. It's not a small task and not a small question.
You know, I think that the immediate step is to garner support in whatever territory you're in for a petition to these governments to demand accountability, and to request of these colonial governments that they hold these institutions, including themselves, because really it was governmental policy that led to the removal of these children and created a pathway of profit for these churches to act, to remove these children. They weren't doing it because there was some altruistic goal, right? They were doing it because they were getting paid a lot of money to take these children. And they were profiting off from the sale of these children into for-profit adoptions. They were literally selling Indigenous children for $10. And so when we think about the accountability, I think there needs to be accountability. And I think that it's difficult because you have these national governments that hold a certain degree of power, who are very quick to hold others accountable for their human rights violations, but have never been held accountable for the human rights violations, myriad human rights violations that they have committed across time. And that needs to stop. There needs to be a call for a tribunal, an international tribunal, to address the crimes that have been committed, the genocidal crimes against Indigenous populations. And there needs to be a tribunal about the misuse of power that these churches have wielded. And so I think those are things that can be done in the immediacy, and there needs to be people standing up and using whatever platforms they have, whatever agency you have to amplify this story, because it's not in the mainstream media. You're not going to see this story in the mainstream media. And so amplify this story in every possible way that you can. Tell this story, stand up and tell this story in your houses of worship, wherever they may be, and demand that something be done about that. The whole process of decolonization, there are tons of tools for decolonization. There's 3 workshops you can start with on my website, sacredinstructions.life. But that also, it's a lot of work, but it's a luxury. You have the opportunity to, take however much time you need to take in the process of decolonizing yourself, while the bodies of our children are being found. And so we really need to prioritize, amplifying the voices of Indigenous peoples, because if we look at what is colonization, colonization is not anti-oppression, right? It's not oppression per se. Colonization is moving into a territory and violently overthrowing the Indigenous peoples and taking their lands. That's what colonization is. Colonization is always connected to an Indigenous population. And there's always this belief in this term called terra nullius, where they say that the land was empty or virgin before the colonists arrived, which means that they didn't see the Indigenous peoples that lived there as being human beings. They didn't even see us being living beings. What Benjamin Franklin, right, as we're coming upon July 4th here in the United States, what he said about the Indigenous peoples were that they were a sketch in red crayon who were holding this land until the true masters arrived, meaning them, the white men of the land would arrive. And so Indigenous peoples have been made invisible across the globe. They have been made into caricatures. Their voices have been diminished. They have been dehumanized because all others who have joined into the colonial set and settled into an area that is not their original home territories has benefited from the subjugation, from the murder, from the genocide of Indigenous peoples and the taking of Indigenous lands in some ways. So there is this common interest in suppressing the voice of Indigenous peoples. There's common interest in this invisibility that Indigenous peoples have faced. And there needs to be a common movement to change that and to amplify the voices of Indigenous peoples. And so I think that that's what needs to happen in the immediacy.
Thank you, Sherri. I can just suggest and say that in the Filipino communities, I can give 2 examples. There's one that's in Toronto area, and they have rallied to be allies. They've been working with the Indigenous communities there for probably, a good 15 years directly. And then in Sonoma, they created a cohort. They're in their 2nd year of the local Indigenous people to hear the stories and amplify it, to create good relations. That's the first thing. And then to support the Indigenous advocating for whatever the Indigenous needs are in those areas. So these can be done at a local level. You need to seek them out because unfortunately, there isn't a national movement like Sherri was saying. We need to have something that's unified, but you can do things locally. One of the things that I've done to amplify the Native voices, especially the women's voices at a conference, was to my first and each repeating year that the conference is held is to hold a panel called Voices of She of Many Colors. and it's the Indigenous women speaking directly from the inside of their own culture, which makes it unique than trying to speak through the lens of the colonizer to meet you. So these are just a few personal examples that you can take in your own life. Judith, do you have another question?
You both spoke a bit about your matriarchal cultures and how they're related to gifting. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what is a matriarchal culture and how it relates to the maternal gift economy.
I can share a little bit. One of the things for us in the Wabanaki homeland, it's where we've been underground for several hundred years, and we're longhouse people, and we're homeless in our homeland. And so when we began to talk about moving and restructuring our own traditional governing systems that are, that the colonial institutions that are in place have severed and closed those access for our, for us to thrive and to grow and to sustain ourselves, let alone even organize and acknowledge. So earlier when I was introduced as in my recent appointment, it's an honor to be part of that structure of restructuring our own traditional systems. As a woman chief, we have but we're still decolonizing, decolonizing and unraveling that, because it's the clan mothers, it's the grandmothers that hold those that center of our governing structures, of our whole social, economic, political structures. And so in our language, it's already incorporated who we are. And so the gift economy is part of, it's our foundational pieces. But I want to quickly refer back to that too. Like there are like this, when we move into when speaking in English, the chief is not the chief as understood in a colonial lens and hierarchical structures. It feeds into something that severs us from our whole community. So it sounds so good and a form of recognition, but in Indigenous language, we pride ourselves in non-interference, and it's a whole unit. Like there's so much to share in that, but I just want to correct that too about women chiefs. The moment when we say ebit, the woman, it is understood already in our language that she is the source of life and the center of life. So maybe I'm going off course. I've forgotten where I was going to lead this towards, but I think it's just we need to be supporting women-led initiatives and connecting with each other. And it's it's understanding when we have that, using this as an analogy, when we matriarchal, matricultural, and patriarchal systems have been deeply wounded, and because the woman is no longer in the center of life. And so I think that's what we need to be refocusing. And where that starts is we begin to look at ourselves as women, and that we're who we are as women, and start making those deep connections to our first mother, to our first grandmother, which is our earth mother, and our grandmother moon. And that because these two beings have taught us, they're both non-discriminating beings, and they've taught, we all have been taught and created. So the deeper we all go into our ancestral roots and understand who we are from that, then we're going to find ourselves in that same space. And the root systems of our sacred mother will teach us how to support each other. It's so foreign when I'm speaking that in our language. I feel like I'm not saying what I really want to say. Fortunately, Sherri she's very fluent in that language, so she's able to, good team. So I'll pass it over to Sherri.
Value, Nita Bisk. You know, when I think about this, I think about the ways that Miigam'agan saying the translation from our language into English is so hard to understand. And I think that there's a concept that I've been talking about this quite a bit lately, where it always comes to a question of sovereignty. When it comes to Indigenous rights, we talk about Indigenous sovereignty, and people get really nervous when we talk about Indigenous sovereignty, right? And that sovereignty, and within that sovereignty is where our matrilineal and matricultural ways of being are held. When Europeans think about sovereignty, they think about the way that sovereignty has been appropriated by their own people. And so sovereignty is a word that comes, it's a Near Eastern theology term that was adopted by Europeans, appropriated by Europeans. And the ways that they used it, because this theological term referred to deities that were all powerful. They had absolute power and an unpredictable nature. You never knew if they were going to be benevolent or malevolent. And so when people think about the way that sovereignty has been applied to European monarchs in regard to being all powerful, but also having this unpredictable nature. Are they going to harm us? Are they going to shower us with benefits? How are we going to be treated? We don't have any idea from day to day. There's this changeability that's attached to this idea of sovereignty and power over, that people confuse when they hear Indigenous sovereignty. Oh my goodness, what are the Indigenous peoples going to do to us? And so there's no word for sovereignty in our language. And so when we're talking about, from our own perspective, from a Skijinawak perspective, from an Indigenous perspective, of what sovereignty is, the closest thing in our language is this term, Endabello Mosul Deepen. And what that means is we own ourselves. And so when we think about we own ourselves, it's not that we're trying to exert power over, it's that we're taking responsibility for ourselves and our relationship with the life around us. We also recognize that Nigwaskiktamik, that Mother Earth owns herself, that all of our relatives in the created world own themselves, and they have a right to live their lives free from molestation by human beings, free from the imposition of the will of others over them. The type of sovereignty that Europeans talk about is in direct contrast to the type of sovereignty that we're thinking about when we think about Indibello Mosel in our responsibility in owning ourselves. We're not stewards over the land. What we are is we're stewards of our own relationship with the rest of life. We have responsibility for ourselves in the ways that we behave in the world, and we have the right to choose how we want to be in relationship, in kinship with the rest of life. And so just that one term helps to highlight the distinction. So when we're thinking about matriarchy, and we're talking about matriarch in relation to Indigenous ways of knowing and being, people automatically just put that over the term patriarchy and assume that it's going to be the same thing led by women. And unfortunately, that's largely what the women's movement has been in the Western world, has been an exertion of power by women. It's essentially been the patriarchy in drag. A true matriarchal movement is a movement that brings forth the true nature of the sacred feminine, that truly honors and protects life, that protects the sacredness of life, that recognizes that everything that we do to the other is in some way also going to be done to us. So in our traditional ways of being, we had a system set up where the clan mothers were the ones who the problems were brought to the clan mothers. And the clan mothers represented the inside. And so one of the favorite things that Miigam'agan and I have discussed is when we were talking about words in the language that describe the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine, and Miigam'agan said, well, I think that this in our language, in the Miigam'agan language, is the terms for husband and wife. And so when she described that to me, that the wife is the literal translation for the word for wife is the one who takes me, keeps me close to my heart and my spirit. And the word for husband is the one who takes me under their skin. So the one who brings me inside, the sacred feminine, the one who keeps me connected to my heart and spirit. The masculine takes that one that keeps them connected to the heart and spirit and brings it under their skin. Right. And so that internal aspect of heart-based intuitive knowing is the representation of the sacred feminine. That external force that meets the world, the physical world out there, is the masculine in action. And the two of them working together is present within every one of us. And so when we start thinking about what is a matriarchy with an Indigenous perspective, it's that one that keeps me connected to the heart and spirit leading the way. And so when the problems were brought to the clan mothers would sit in circle with one another because in circle you see all sides and every voice is honored. And so by the time you're done going round and round and round that circle, you see the entire issue from every side and you have a full understanding of it before you're making a decision. And then the clan mothers would instruct the hereditary chiefs and the warriors. This is how we want you to go forward out in the external world, and we want you to address this issue in this way. And we're going to tell you how to address this issue in a way that honors the sacredness of life. So we're going to send you out there to do something that is in recognition of that honor. And so when we think about like counting coup, what counting coup was a warrior would go up to their perceived enemy, right? And they would take something from them, or they would leave something of theirs where they could find it. And oftentimes it would happen when they were sleeping. And what that said to that person was, I was close enough that I could have taken your life, but I chose to honor the sacredness of your life. And me taking this thing from you or leaving this thing for you is letting you know that I chose to honor the sacredness of your life. And so then in turn, that other will honor the sacredness of our lives. And so everything was done in that context. First of honoring the sacredness of life. Decisions that were made about engaging with others was often a protective stance, but also a demonstration of force that says, hey, we could take your life, but we're going to choose not to, unless it's a last resort defense of our own lives. And you know, these concepts that we have within our core cultural values of making sure that everybody has enough, so that they're able to fully develop and to bring their gifts forward, because that uplifts the whole community. That also, you know, it's a representation of how a healthy, balanced, loving mother or grandmother would care for her own children or grandchildren. And that type of matrilineal, matricultural, or matriarchal, if you will, way of being in relation to not holding power over from a European sovereignty standpoint, but about bringing forth the power within that gives the individuals that you're working with, that you're leading, the power to take responsibility for their own selves, recognizing that they own the power, that autonomy over their own lives, and give them all the tools that they need in order to live that life in a way that honors the rest of life. And honors our first, what we call Miigam'agan, our first treaty or our first sacred agreement, which is to live in respectful balance with the rest of life. And so when we think about matriarchy from our own perspectives, the stories that we have, there are some stories that are that I talk about in the new book that I'm writing, one of the new books that I'm writing, called Women Rise Wild, where we talk about this one story that we have about these two figures in our mythology, Gluskabe and Mulsum. And so in the stories, there was this male and female twin that got turned into two male twins that got turned into a white and a black wolf in one story, and the good and the bad in other stories. And in those stories, the story shifts over time. One of them shifts over time. And I'm just giving you the nutshell version of this. It's a long story. You'll have to wait until the book comes out to read the whole thing. But in this story, we see so many times that our elders are misrepresenting our stories to the missionaries. And then those stories are getting proliferated forward because, as Miigam'agan said, we've been underground, right? We've been hiding our knowledge. But also within some of those distorted stories was messages to us. And this story about the white and the black wolf, or about Gluskab and Mulsum, in this story is a message for us, I believe. And so when it first occurred to me, it totally blew my mind. And so in this one particular story, we see this repetition of the missionary story, of the Christian story, of the black wolf is not born the way that natural life occurs. It's not born in a way that honors the central role of the mother in the birthing. In this particular story, Mulsum cuts himself out of the side of the mother. He slices open the side of the mother and comes out through the side and kills the mother in the process. And when that story was shifted from our original stories, because that is a missionary version of that story, when that story was shifted like that, I believe that was our ancestors warning us that when you adopt the story of Christianity, it kills the mother. It takes the matriarchs out of the central role within our communities and within our governance structures. And that was the way that our ancestors were warning us. Because when we go back to the stories that we know are the true stories of the birthing of those beings, there was a masculine and a feminine. It wasn't two men. And so, there's all of that wrapped up in it. And we could talk for a year. I could talk for a year about that piece of it. But when we think about matriarchy, we have to start from that central framework of understanding the ways that it's been distorted and the ways that the colonial language of matriarchy and sovereignty are very, very different from the ways that we view matriarchy and sovereignty. Because you can't really have that discussion without that central understanding of the differences between those terms.
Thank you, Sherri. It was very full. It was a very full answer. I see that there are other questions that have come in, Judith.
Michelle Scholl asks, how do you define justice in what you've been talking about?
Miigam'agan, I'm going to let you start.
Well, we don't have words like priority, rights, and justice is we're responding to natural law, and the foundational pieces are deeply I don't think they're there for the balance of humanity to begin with. So when we start to define like justice and rights and all that, we need to shift a whole realm and way of thinking and being, because that's where I think the challenges are, is when we begin to speak in a language that was designed to keep us apart. And when I mentioned earlier about being longhouse people, and that how intentional it was for the longhouses to be dismantled and attacked, because the women are, in our language, longhouse and woman is one and the same. These are our nation houses. This is, and mima juinu, mima juwahan, the life ways. Mi is the source of life, which is very feminine. Ma is the collective, the collection of all. And Sherri was sharing that about when we talk about mother-based cultures. So justice is embedded in the heart, in our love. And in our language, in the Miigam'agan, I hear this a lot in the language, and the elders, much older, wise societies respond with such enlightenment when they share how they pride, how our ancestors, how they pride ourselves in non-interference. And it's that ownership that Sherri was talking about. It's just so widely spread, and we need time. We need to come together and redefine, because now that's what we're doing. Is the first attack on our people was the language. Our languages were outlawed. We were forbidden to speak, and then the missionaries and all the system that came and took the language, created a more of a colonial Western definition. So now, today, we're raising our children to, when we teach them, when they're being taught outside of our longhouse and still in the Western educational institutions, they're now lentuk. Deer is deer, but lentuk is, in our language, is not deer, the deer. It's much more than that. And so lentuk is in response to our relation. And you can only have that when you have a relationship to each other. We know each other so intimately, and that we're so much so that we're in sync, and that we are communicating at such a deep level, and that we're the same. We're the same thought, same mind, and we respond to their presence when they're near us. So the other violation is not just the Indian residential schools, not just the Indian day school, but the colonial educational institutions. So I was going into Longhouse because Longhouse is about being enwrapped and housed by our sacred mother. That balance Sherri was talking about, the woman and the feminine and the masculine. And so that's the partnership that is all incorporated in the language. So when we're asked to define this, I keep encouraging everyone to research their ancestral roots and go deep into those old languages, to go back to their ancestral mother tongues. And you'll be so fortunate if you come from a whole variety of peoples. Then you have a buffet of knowledge, So anyway, so I know I can go on about all that, but I think we need to create another space of connections like that, because I was just recently introduced to a word, blessings, and from one of the circles of women, and they were sharing that in the ancient language, blessings was in reference to blood. So I don't know any more than that, but I just know that was what ties us together, and that's what I mean about reconnecting to your ancestral roots. Then we'll all be in the same space. We need you to do that, so we all confirm each other, and that we rise above all this once the truth is revealed, which is what is happening. All these revelations are coming forth for us to blanket ourselves of the ancient ones coming out to guide the process, guide us forward. This is for me. Sherri.
I'm so thankful, Miigam'agan, for you in my life. We are a good team, and every time we have this opportunity to share together, I think we both, have strings within us. Our ancestral strings are touched, and then that resonance from that rises up within us. And so when we're working together, we can go back and forth off each other like this once we get going for a long time. But I want to go back to this thing on justice, and the question that somebody just put up there about owning oneself doesn't go back to property. I mean, that's your Lockean theory of ownership that comes under that colonial guise, where they believe that property, no property right exists unless there's some capitalistic beneficial use that's being connected to the property, and that is viewed as a right, a property right. We're talking about a responsibility. It's a very different thing. So the form of ownership we're talking about is about being responsible for yourself, owning your own actions, being accountable to, behaving like you have relatives. That's the thing. The biggest insult that you can give to a Native person is to tell them that they're acting like they don't have any relatives. And so it's not about a right, it's about a responsibility when we talk about ownership in that way. And then so going back to that question about justice, what comes to mind for me is is this term Wilikimau. Wilikimau is harmony within oneself, and so justice is being able to restore that sense of harmony within those who have been harmed, to restore their sense of balance with the world around them, with the community, with the people that are around them. That's justice, is restoring that sense of harmony. And then when you think about restorative justice, it's about that process of Wilikimau, restoring that sense of harmony within the person who committed the harm, because they're committing harm because they're traumatized, they're out of balance, they have lost their equilibrium and their sense of harmony. And so it all comes back to really restoring harmony, first restoring the harmony for those who have been harmed and for the peoples who have been harmed as a result of the action that was taken, and then moving from that justice to the restorative justice of restoring the harmony and the balance within the individual who's committing the harm. So when we think about justice, those are the things that we're thinking about. And somebody had mentioned in one of the questions that there's this growing sense of patriarchy within Indigenous cultures, and I would disagree with that. I would say that the centrality of the women is coming back in powerful ways. Women are stepping forward in very, very powerful ways across all Indigenous territories. Not only do we work with Indigenous territories in North America, but also in Central and South America, and on the other side of the equator. We have been working with our relatives both in Australia and New Zealand. And the women are coming forward in a very powerful way and reclaiming the heart of their communities, reclaiming the heart of their people, away from the imbalanced patriarchal. It's colonial patriarchy is the problem. There's a sense of patriarchy that's really seated within the sacred masculine that needs to be restored, just like a matriarchy that's seated within the sacred feminine that needs to be restored. And then you have, that medeolin, that space in between, when people talk about being a hollow reed, they're talking about the space in between. When we're talking about our sacred ceremonial ways of being, one of our brothers has talked about that as being the space between the wood and the skin on the drum. When they connect, that's where the sound is made. And so it's that space in between, that hollow space in between. That's where all of the creation exists, right? And so it's not just a duality of the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine, which is what this whole trans movement and gender fluidity movement is teaching us, is that there's also this element in the space in between that's critical to us being able to recognize the wholeness of our being. And for us to be able to find that space in between ourselves as well, so that we can open up a space for silence, for the sacred elements to move in that space in between, so that we can come forward as whole beings, fully aware of all that we contain within us and fully able to bring that forward in service to the rest of creation. And so, we're living in this really, really interesting time where, the mothers are marching out. And I think that rising patriarchy that some may see within Indigenous communities is a grasp. It's the dying grasping breath of that colonial patriarchy that has had our communities in its grip. And as that grip's being lessened, they're grasping at it. But the mothers are continuing to march forward. It's the women who are standing on the front lines, protecting the sacred waters, just like we carry the sacred waters of life within our bodies and within our wombs when we're bringing forth life. It's the women who are standing in protection of those sacred waters. It's the women who are coming forward and who are speaking for the protection of our future generations. And so I don't agree with that. I think that we're in a powerful time where the mothers are all standing up. Mother Earth is standing up against the harms that we've been causing. We're seeing more and more powerful storms, that winds that are stronger than we've ever seen. Mother Earth is shaking right now to, and letting a fever rage to show us, the harms that we're causing. And I think that mothers everywhere are following the lead of Niguskikdamik, of Mother Earth, and, coming forward to say, hey, enough of this misbehaving. We're going to start remembering that we're family and that we love each other. And that's what I see as I've been traveling across Indigenous territories. So.
Thank you, Sherri.
Yeah.
And thank you, Miigam'agan, for that very deep answer to those questions. I wanted to just address, there was one comment in the chat that was asking, is this a return to oneness? And, that whole concept of oneness is really skewed towards the New Age orientation. And what I want to say is that it isn't about oneness as much as it's about recognizing, owning yourself, is what both Miigam'agan and Sherri have been talking about in terms of allowing for the diversity. That we can't actually, we're not all going to be exactly alike, that we resonate, just like all of nature has many different species and many different types of plants and rocks and animals, that we need to recognize how we can communicate well. I think that's the key, is through our communication, and that we're not all one. We're not all one same thing.
And
Yeah.
Letecia, that's also covered in the book where I talk about, oneness and sameness are not equal.
Yeah.
And people like to talk about oneness as though it's homogeneity. And so I really talk about that a lot in the book, about the distinction between oneness and sameness, and moving forward with all of our biodiversity and human diversity intact is how we become healthy. That's really important. So thank you for bringing that.
I just want to quickly add too, with the question about patriarchy and capitalism I'm seeing, and coming from the longhouse, that's those questions are people working out of that balance, out of the longhouse, out of the the natural order of life, and I think those are the imbalances or the disconnections. Being disconnected is the results of capitalism and patriarchal dominance and so on. So, but the balance that from the longhouse or Indigenous worldview is about honoring that, owning your own responsibility, and maintaining yourself. So, but I really look forward to this comment. I know we're coming to the end. I'm so appreciative, and I'm excited about these conversations and the questions, because I would strongly recommend the continuation of these discussions to happen. There's so much.
Yeah.
It's very hopeful, and I've been so encouraged by the conversation and reconnecting with some of you. I see Max is here too, so it's nice. I thank you again so much for the invitation, the opportunity to see and feel and be present with all of you.
Thank you so much. Come back soon. We'd love to have you again. So come back anytime.
Thank you, Miigam'agan. And Sherri, do you have some closing words and maybe a blessing for us or a prayer? We've held such a deep space, and then I just have a few little announcements to make, but maybe in your closing, Sherri, I just wanted to remind people to please take a look at Sherri's website so you can find out about her ceremony. And that's another way that we can all stay connected, is holding the space with that. So Sherri, if you have some words for us, that would be great.
Yeah, and there's also there's also a separate website for the ceremony called Healing Turtle Island. So it's healingturtleisland.org is the website for the ceremony. And you can also find it on my website, sacredinstructions.life. And so I would just like to close by expressing my gratitude to Jen for bringing us all together so many times. She's, I remember being at one of the ASWM conferences and hearing Jen talk about the maternal gift economy for the first time. And I was sitting there and it's long days and a lot of people sharing. And, so I was sitting there and I was thinking about my dinner. And then all of a sudden, Jen starts talking about the maternal gift economy and my ears went, because I recognized, okay, she's talking about something that's very Indigenous. This is a return to our Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And so that's how this all began, with us being together in this way. And I'm just very thankful that Jen has called us all together, and she continues to call us all together. And for the friendship that I have developed with these incredible women who have been part of this group. And then I can bring in incredible friends of mine, soul sisters like Miigam'agan, to share her wisdom with this group as well, which is so full and so deep. I'm just incredibly thankful for that. And so, I would also like to offer the opportunity for Miigam'agan to give a prayer in the language when I'm finished, just so that we both have some final words to share as we're closing up. When we come together, one of the things that we always do at the end is to recognize that whatever we say, whatever we do, whatever we give breath to and give life to, impacts other people. And so, we acknowledge that impact by saying at the end of our prayers or at the end of any statement or any talking that we do, to say, Kachiwaliwan, Pasilda and Dilnabamak, thank you to all those who have listened, but also thank you to all of the powers that be. And to recognize that whatever I'm offering out to the world, I'm offering not just for myself, but for all of my relations. And so I will just end with that, rather than having two prayers from me and from Miigam'agan, and allow her to offer a closing prayer in the language, so we both have an opportunity to have some closing words.
Aling Sherri. Kisidegejit, Miskamijina. Miweram dandeligan muyak mimajuahan. Miweram dandeli mawali agabida utiek. Dandeligan muyak mogigan nodi, nestuodi. Mige miguide mekdai, whichi sithamudi get. Dandeli sithamuadi gadiek. Ahige dan abajuna hadu ko, abajuna hadu eget ko. Mimajuahan. Aholi miakten msukkohai. Ahwegulali uchit dandeli unahidayo tijahamistut. Dana ulaweskoida habanikai residential school. Unahaikna mo panahaikna gahan. Regulali chikilo ebidote. Thanking our ancestors for coming to be present, the ancestors within us and the ancestors that have walked on our sacred mother. Thanksgivings.
Thank you so much, Miigam'agan and Sherri. Just a few little announcements to make. And for all of you who are listening, who were present in the room today and listening to the recording, thank you for holding the space for yourself and being tender with yourself as you're taking in this very potent information. This salon will be recorded, and you can see that on the Maternal Gift Economy movement.org. I want to remind you that next, in 2 weeks, we're going to be skipping our regular salon so that everyone can participate in the symposium that is being co-sponsored by the Association of the Study of Women and Mythology and what is it? The Institute of Archaeomythology. And it's called The Wisdom Across the Ages, celebrating the centennial of archaeomythologist Maria Gimbutas, July 16th through 18th. And you can find the link on our website, maternalgifteconomymovement.org, or at ASWIM's symposium.womenandmyth.org. But we invite you to join us again then in 4 weeks, July 31st, for our next salon. It has been a tremendous honor and pleasure to have both Sherri and Miigam'agan with us. So please, everyone, be well, stay safe, take care of your tenderness, and be brave and courageous in your solidarity. Be kind to one another. We'll see you July 31st. And for those of you whose questions did not get answered, our presenters will receive your comments and questions along with email addresses so that they may respond to you directly. And if you have any other questions, you can send them to us directly at maternalgifteconomy@gmail.com, and we'll make sure they get to the right place. So for now, thank you very much from everyone here. Bye for now. Letecia, Layson, signing off. We'll see you in 4 weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Letecia. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.